Now, there's a suggestion that the Post Office could be facing a £100 million tax bill. Research by a tax policy think tank says that tax relief that the company received to cover its compensation payments could be unlawful. Excuse me. Let's speak to Dan Neidle, who's the tax expert behind that research. He joins me now live. A very good morning to you, Dan Neidle. Thanks so much for talking to us. So you've been looking at the Post Office's tax affairs. So explain to us what exactly you found.
There was a mysterious disclosure in this year's accounts saying they were discussing something with HMRC, and we dug through the accounts and we found that they'd created a provision in the accounts for compensation to postmasters of 934 million. They hadn't paid it, they hadn't paid anything like that, it's just a provision. They'd then claimed a tax deduction for the 934 million. Now, you can't do that. You can claim a tax deduction for things that you do in the course of your trade, your expenses of your normal business, but you can't claim a tax deduction for things which are unlawful, illegal, or outside the trade, like persecuting 4,000 postmasters. That 934 million should never have been claimed as a tax deduction.
So this hinges essentially on the fact that these compensation payments are seen as being punitive, part of a wrongdoing. That's the central issue here, is it? That's why you think it's unlawful.
Well, and we know that HMRC share that view and are investigating the Post Office.
Well, yes. What do you know about that? So you know, do you, that HMRC is looking into this exact matter?
Well, we know from the disclosures in the report and accounts. We know from a source that we have at the Post Office. We also know from the Post Office's response when they said they were in discussions with HMRC. Now, if I told you I was in discussions with HMRC about 100 million of tax that I might owe, I think you'd know that they weren't pleasant discussions over tea. It's an investigation.
How much depends on the Met investigation and the inquiry and what wrongdoing is uncovered? Is that relevant to this tax issue?
It's not relevant to this, which we think is worth about 100 million of cash tax for them. But there are many other items in the Post Office's accounts where that investigation and the inquiry suggests they also got the tax wrong. For example, what about all the money they claimed back from postmasters that they said postmasters had stolen and they hadn't? Did the Post Office pay tax on that income? What about all the expenses of prosecuting these poor postmasters? Bet they claimed the deduction for that. They shouldn't have done. What about the legal claims they fought for years using the most ruthless and unethical tactics? Should the Post Office have got a tax deduction for that? Now, if this was a normal company, HMRC would be all over them, pushing every point as far as it could, and I very much hope they're doing the same here.
The Post Office statement suggests that this was to do with the fact that the government gave funding to the Post Office to pay compensation as its sole shareholder, and so it should be treated in the same way as other funding it gets from government. What's your take on that? Is the fact that the Post Office is owned by the government, that the government is the main shareholder, is that relevant to this?
No, it's not. I mean, that's yet another point that I haven't even mentioned yet, that the way the Post Office chose to receive funding from government means the Post Office is very likely paying tax on that funding. Most companies get funding because their shareholder buys shares or makes them a loan. But for reasons known only to itself, the Post Office decided to basically accept gifts from the government, and those were taxable. So the Post Office is saying that they are trying to get out of that, trying to push government to find a way out of that, but they probably owe a whole pile of tax in addition to the 100 million that I led with.
If the Post Office was forced to repay £100 million to HMRC, what would it mean for the solvency of the Post Office, do you think?
Well, I don't think the Post Office can afford to do it. They'd require yet another handout from the Treasury. But I think the big question is this. You have an executive team who've boasted about the Post Office becoming profitable. 1/3 of their bonus package is linked to that profitability. And actually, the Post Office was never profitable at all. Actually, they had a huge tax black hole in their accounts, which they failed to disclose for years, which they smuggle out in very, very elliptical disclosure in this year's accounts. And their own remuneration policy says that in such circumstances, bonuses should be clawed back. Well, they should be thinking about that.
That's an interesting point. So you think that the pay and bonuses in the past should be re-examined?
Yes, the accounts appear to have been misstated. For a normal company, that would be very serious. For a normal company, I think the shareholders would be demanding the CEO and CFO's head on a plate. Why isn't that happening here?
And if the £100 million is required by HMRC and needs to be paid back, you say the Post Office probably couldn't cope with that. So what does that mean? Would the government have to step in an instance like that?
The government's been stepping in for years. It's the only thing that keeps the Post Office going. All of these compensation, all of the costs of making right its own wrongdoing, we, the taxpayer, are paying for. And this will be just another instance of us collectively making up for the Post Office's failings.
OK, well, Dan Neidle, really interesting to get some information about your investigations. Thanks very much indeed for joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.